Hello everyone, how's it going? Today I'm going to be talking about Black Sabbath. Now, Black Sabbath is, I think, a really good band. Of course, we got to talk about them because they're basically the grandfathers of metal. So I'll be reviewing not their whole discography, but all of their stuff from the 70s era. The stuff with, of course, Ozzy Osbourne, of course, before the 80s when Dio came in. And don't get me wrong, I think the Dio era of Black Sabbath was pretty good as well, but I think I prefer the Ozzy era. That's just me. So, of course, we can get into the self-titled debut, Black Sabbath. I think this is a really good album. This album came out in 1970, and I gotta say, it's a really good debut album. Maybe one of my favorite debut albums of all time. You could say that this is the first metal album to ever exist, and of course one of the most important metal albums of all time. Yeah, a lot of great stuff on this album, a lot of replay value, I'd say. So of course next up we got Black Sabbath's second album, which came out on the same year as their debut, Paranoid. Now this album, a lot of people say that this is like where they really stepped up from their debut, which I can somewhat agree with, but I think their debut is pretty underrated compared to this one. Like, it's really hard for me to decide which album is better, but this is still a great album nonetheless. It's got, of course, classics like War Pigs. I mean, if you're a Black Sabbath fan, how do you not like this song? And Paranoid, of course, the title track. Iron Man was actually the first Black Sabbath song I ever heard. Yeah, I've always liked that song. A lot of great stuff about this album. So, yeah, that's Paranoid. I think it's a great album, and it was my first Black Sabbath album that I ever purchased. And of course, next up we got Master of Reality, which a lot of people say is their best work, but I might have to agree. It's definitely one of their best albums, probably top 3, I'd say. This album has a lot of great stuff on it, like Sweet Leaf, After Forever. A lot of good stuff on that album, I must say. There's not really much to complain about on that album. It's, like I said, I think it's one of Black Sabbath's best albums. And now we got Black Sabbath Volume 4. Now, fun fact about this album was originally supposed to be called Snowblind, I think, which is one of the songs on this album, but I don't know why they didn't call it that. I thought that would have been pretty cool. So I guess you can kind of consider Snowblind the title track, you could say. Now, what do I think of Volume 4? I think it's a pretty good album. Tomorrow's Dream, Changes, Supernaut, Snowblind, Under the Sun. Under the Sun is probably my all-time favorite track on this album. I really like the instrumentation in that song. Volume 4 is a pretty good album, but maybe one of my least favorites of the 70s era, but that's not saying much because this is still a very good album, I'd say. This album's biggest problem is it doesn't have the replay value as much as their other albums have, but this is still a great album. So of course next up we got Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. Now, there's also some people that say that this is Black Sabbath's best album, and I would also say this is within my top 3 favorites. This album to me has a lot of replay value, probably more than any other Black Sabbath album in my opinion. I mean, the title track, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, probably one of the best title tracks that the band has ever done. I like the instrumentation in that. Fluff is just an excellent instrumental piece. Sabracadabra is, of course, another really good one as well. I believe Metallica covered that song too, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, I think Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath has a lot of good stuff on it. It's definitely better than Volume 4, I'd say. Great album for sure. And next up we got Sabotage, which Black Sabbath went a little more... This is kind of where Black Sabbath went a little more rock and roll, and I like their rock and roll side, and I think it really works for this album. I mean, Hole in the Sky, Symptom of the Universe, and Am I Going Insane are just excellent tracks. Symptom of the Universe is probably the one I return to the most. That song has a lot of replay value. This album is really good. And I would also say Sabotage is within my top 3 favorite Black Sabbath albums. So there you go. You already know what my top 3 favorite Black Sabbath albums are. But yeah, Sabotage is just... God, it's excellent. So, of course, next up we got Technical Ecstasy, which is, once again, they took a more rock and roll route with this one, and it works for this album too. A lot of great stuff on this one. There's not much to say about it, but I think it's a great album. And of course, now we got Never Say Die, which I think is a super underrated Black Sabbath album. They kind of went a little more technical with this one, and I think it works. Johnny Blade is just a great song on this album. This is the one I enjoy the most, probably. But yeah, this album, I can see why this one may not grab some people at first listen, but it's a really underrated album, and I do enjoy it to some extent. Is it their best of their 70s work? No, but I think it's still pretty good. Well guys, that concludes the 70s Black Sabbath review. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Take care.